Alright, so we're officially in November now, so I think it's safe to say that spooky season is definitively over. However, that's not going to stop me from at least trying to keep it alive a little bit longer, because I did have some spooky pickups in October, and that's what today's video is all about, are some of the games that I grabbed in October. So, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in with one that is an indie game that is not too dissimilar, I think, from Vampire Survivors, and that is Brotato. And I kind of grabbed this on a whim because it actually showed up recommended to me on the Steam store, and it was like, do you like Vampire Survivors? If so, you should probably check this out, and they are totally right. If you're a fan of Vampire Survivors, you're probably going to find a lot to love in Brotato, but instead of just slaying waves and waves of the undead, instead you are a potato facing off against waves of aliens. And one of the first things that jumped out to me about this game are the visuals, because it went for like a hand-drawn art style that would be more in line with something like Binding of Isaac or Castle Crashers, rather than like the 8 or 16-bit aesthetic that you see on display in Vampire Survivors. However, very much like Vampire Survivors, the gameplay feels very similar in so much as you are just basically moving, and that's about it, because everything else that you unlock, whether that's weapons or abilities, just fire off automatically at predetermined increments, and as waves go on, you level up, you get a little bit stronger, and you basically just do your best to last as long as you possibly can. However, another key difference between this and Vampire Survivors is that a run in Vampire Survivors might last you like 20 or 30 minutes. However, in this game, the waves are a lot more manageable because instead of just giving you like one really long run, it kind of chunks it out into multiple waves that could be knocked out anywhere from like, 45 seconds to a minute, it seemed like when I was playing. Now, I can't say for certain just yet whether or not I will prefer this to Vampire Survivors, but I will say it does feel a little bit polished despite the fact that they're both still in early access. But still, if you are a fan of those like top-down, endless wave action games, I think Brotato is definitely worth a look. Now, another indie game that I picked up really was one that I only just heard rumblings about, and I finally pulled the trigger because it was on sale for like $2 or $3, I think, and that is Pony Island. Now, on the surface, Pony Island appears to be just like a cutesy game about a pony who is jumping over obstacles, but then later on it takes a decidedly more vicious turn. And that's the thing, I can't really say too much about the game without spoiling it, and I really don't want to do that because the game is a pretty short game by my estimation. But here's the thing, all I'll say is that it is not what it appears to be on the surface, and it actually very quickly devolves into a game of multiple genres that have been strung together in a very interesting way. It tells a very interesting, very dark tale, I would say. The only thing that was a little bit off-putting for me, but not at all a deal breaker, was the controls in Pony Island, because I was not expecting it to lean so heavily into touchpad controls, and I was a little bit dismayed when I first fired it up because it said, hey, this is best played with like a mouse, and you probably don't want to play it with a touchpad, although that being said, I've been playing it with a touchpad and it seems to be just fine. Hopefully that will remain true as I get deeper into the story and levels might get a little bit more frenetic. And when I first started playing it, I thought I would try to just kind of get a feel for it, play for like 10 or 15 minutes or something like that, and before I knew it, I was already just sucked into this game for like an hour and a half straight, and honestly, I probably should have just kept going with it because again, this is supposed to be a fairly short game, but yeah, Pony Island, not at all what it appears to be on the surface, and if you're at all a horror fan or looking for a spooky game, I would say kind of in the vein of Doki Doki Literature Club, although probably not nearly that dark, you should definitely check out Pony Island because I've had a lot of fun with it so far and I can't wait to see how it ends. Alright, so next up is a game that I actually bought on the 3DS forever ago, and later on I believe it was ported to both the Xbox and the PlayStation, but you can play it on PC as well, obviously, or I wouldn't be talking about it in a Steam Deck video, and that is Castlevania Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate HD. I hope I got that name right because, wow, that's a mouthful. And here's the thing, I always felt bad about abandoning this game. When it came out on the 3DS, I was so excited because to that point I've been a huge Castlevania fan. I have not played every game in the series, but I played a lot of the early titles, I played every title in the Game Boy Advance and beat those, and beat all the ones on the Nintendo DS, so when this came out for the 3DS, I assumed, hey, it's another Castlevania, what could go wrong? And I wouldn't say they went wrong necessarily, but it definitely takes some risks, and I think definitely goes in a different direction than like the standard Metroidvania, kind of formula that you would expect for a Castlevania game. And I can only surmise that at the time when I first played it, it was just off-putting enough that I was like, I don't know if I like this, I'll come back to it. Well, as it turns out, years and years later, I have come back to it on the Steam Deck, and I gotta say, I don't think I should have slept on it for this long. Now, ideally, it would probably be best for me to beat Castlevania Lords of Shadow first, which I have not done, because as I understand it, this is a direct sequel to that game. But nonetheless, I went ahead and fired it up for about an hour just to kind of get a feel for it and see if I could, kind of remember what it was like playing it for the first time on the 3DS. And I really enjoyed myself. I mean, it kind of felt like God of War smashed into Castlevania, and I really like that 2.5D art style. The same way I like that 2.5D art style in Castlevania, what was it? The PSP one. Oh, this is gonna mess me up. Dracula X Chronicles. I don't know what, I think that was because I was thinking like Rondo of Blood, but no, it was Dracula X Chronicles on the PSP, which I think is just Rondo of Blood. Again, I haven't played every Castlevania in the history of it, and I wouldn't say that I have the deepest knowledge of it, but I've played enough Castlevania to know that I sure do like the formula, and even though the formula that is on display here is not perfectly aligned with the things that I enjoyed on like the Game Boy Advance, or like the DS, or even I guess more recently, playing games like, Bloodstained. I still enjoy my time with it, and I'm really hoping that I can spend more time with it because I think this is a game that is not overly long. I think it's only going to clock in at about like 6 to 8 hours, which is fine. I don't mind a more brisk Castlevania experience, but I can definitely see after playing it for a little bit why it wasn't everyone's cup of tea when it came out, and I think it was actually met with like pretty lukewarm critical reviews, but again, I played it a little bit, and everything about the action felt really, really good to me, and maybe it'll start to wear thin later on. I'm not sure if maybe, like the boss encounters aren't that great, or if at a certain point, like there's just not enough enemy variety, which would really be a crime for a game like Castlevania. But yeah, I'm glad I took the leap on it because it was only like $2.99 on sale, and if you've never played it before and you can find it on sale, I think you should check it out. If you're new to Castlevania, I don't know if it would be the first one that I would recommend because there are probably way better titles that you could get into, but still, I'm glad that I went ahead and tried it out, and I'm probably going to wrap this one up at some point. Now, next up is another indie title that I picked up specifically because it was October, it was horror season, it was a game that I actually just stumbled across randomly one night when I was actually just like staying up late watching Silent Hill 2 documentaries because there's been so much hype for the Silent Hill 2 remake, and that is Murder House. And I gotta hand it to Murder House, it does an amazing job of establishing its whole vibe, like right out of the gate. Not even when you jump into the gameplay, like right from the opening, like, just developer screen, and when you're waiting on the menu, it looks like you're playing on an old VHS, which is just incredible, because the entire feel of the game so far from what I've played is like if you were just watching an old horror movie on a VHS, and then also playing the original Silent Hill on PS1. The presentation was really the big draw for me here, and it's so weird because at one point, I used to always say like, oh, PS1-era graphics did not age that well, whereas 16-bit graphics aged tremendously well. But as I've gotten a little bit older, I'm starting to change my tune on that a little bit, and more I'm finding myself drawn to games that have that more polygonal, just blocky, chunky art style, or, are a throwback to the PS1 era. And more surprising to me still about Murder House was that it was legitimately scary despite the fact that it had intentionally dated graphics. And when you first fire it up, you're presented with a couple of different scenarios you can play through. One is the prologue, which I believe takes place in 1985, and then the other one is just the main game proper, which takes place in 1988. So I went ahead and played through the prologue, which took every bit of like 30 to 45 minutes, I want to say, although I did mess up a couple of times, but essentially it takes place in a mall and there is a murderous Easter bunny. And I won't spoil much beyond that. All I will say is that the prologue legitimately scared me in a couple of key moments, and I think the best way that I can describe the way it uses, the atmosphere that it generates is it's not too dissimilar to the fog in Silent Hill 1. And I know that we look back on Silent Hill 1 now, and we look at that fog as kind of like a necessary evil where it was used to kind of overcome the, just the limitations of the technology at the time, where draw distance wasn't that far, so fog kind of kept everything obscured. But artistically speaking, it also went a really long way towards establishing a really spooky atmosphere for Silent Hill and Silent Hill 2. And while the interior of a 1985 mall isn't quite as scary in the era of Stranger Things, I will say that the way they used darkness in this game was very appealing to me because it had that same sort of effect as the fog in Silent Hill, where it would obscure just enough of what's ahead to make it scary to move forward. And if the prologue is any indication, I'm very excited to see what happens in the main scenario for Murder House. So yeah, if you see this pop up on your recommended, or if you're somebody who's into horror games, specifically throwback horror that has a very retro aesthetic, I think that you should definitely check out Murder House because so far I'm having a blast with it. And finally, not the last game that I picked up, but the last game on this list is Outer Worlds. Now, originally I played Outer Worlds on the Nintendo Switch, and while I enjoyed my time with it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I really should be experiencing it with greater graphical fidelity, especially after watching my dad really get into Outer Worlds and seeing how much better it looked on the Xbox. However, it seemed to me that the Steam Deck might represent a good middle ground, and so far I think it does, although I will say the performance is not quite where I would have expected it to be for this title, and I'm not sure if that's just because, it wasn't very well optimized for PC, or, why that is, but for me, I was able to get it to a place where it definitely runs better than the Switch, but I still think I might prefer to play it on console. And to really get it to that sweet spot of a playable state, I ended up capping the refresh rate and the frame rate down to 40, which, again, pretty common practice. It gives you slightly smoother experience, not quite 60, but certainly a smoother experience than 30. And I also bumped the graphics down to, I believe, medium to get to a place where it felt like it was consistently hitting that 40 FPS and felt really smooth to play. But the technical aspects of playing on the Steam Deck aside, Outer Worlds is still a whole lot of fun. Combat feels pretty fast and fluid. If you're at all a fan of Fallout, you'll probably find something you're going to dig in Outer Worlds, and the humor is absolutely on point. Like, the voice acting and the performances from the characters that you encounter in this game are just an absolute delight. I think that's one of the things that keeps me coming back to the game periodically, is just the fact that those characters are so entertaining to listen to. Now, I wouldn't profess to be a Fallout expert or anything like that. Like, I beat Fallout 3, beat Fallout 4, dabbled in Fallout New Vegas, dabbled in Fallout 76 before the performance was just kind of rough, and I just kind of abandoned it out of the gate, which is really sad. Me and my dad were really pumped to play that one. But yeah, I would say still, if you do like Fallout, I would imagine you will very much like what is on offer in Outer Worlds. And I think I ended up grabbing it on sale for like $10 or something, so Yes, I already have it on the Switch technically, but curiosity got the best of me. I really did want to see, will this be a better experience on the Steam Deck than it was on the Nintendo Switch? And the answer, predictably, is a resounding yes. And finally, a couple of bonuses / honorable mentions, I guess, which were also games that I picked up, but I really haven't spent a ton of time with yet. One would be Deathloop, because that was actually part of the Humble Choice for last month, so I actually ended up getting that one, not for free, but for like the 11 or 12 bucks or whatever it is to get a selection of games each month through Humble. And then the other one was World of Horror, which I bought on sale during the Scream Fest that they were doing, where they were putting like a bunch of like horror games on sale on the Steam Deck. But unfortunately, I played World of Horror a little bit, but that's a really mechanically complex game. It feels like very much like a role-playing, kind of choose-your-own-adventure sort of story, and it had a lot more going on than I was expecting. So even though I think the presentation's really neat, in so much as you can think a monochromatic game that kind of looks like a Palm Pilot looks neat, I'm gonna have to spend some more time with it before I could say anything definitive about it. I mean, both of those games worked great on the Steam Deck. Deathloop was a little bit more taxing, and I think I was getting around 40 to 50 frames per second after a few tweaks. But yeah, they were games that I would like to spend more time with, but haven't as of yet, so they didn't make the cut for like, the big draw for the games on this list. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. I just wanted to do a quick video talking about some of the highlights of games that I grabbed last month. Not all of them were spooky, although I guess a good chunk of them were spooky, come to think of it. But yeah, did you get anything great in October? And sorry the releases have been a little bit weird lately. Normally I'm pretty good about doing Tuesdays and Thursdays, but lately just work's been a little bit crazy. Holidays are coming up, so I'm trying to get production schedule kind of back on track. So thank you so much for your patience and really just watching videos here at all. Hopefully I can get things back to normal soon. But yeah, as always, thank you for your time. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you next one. Bye.